This is Matthew Cratter from Bitcoin University. Today we have a red alert. I want to try to stop this spy bill. So if you're an American voter, please watch this video and consider calling your senators if you agree. If you're not an American voter, I think you'll still find this video interesting as another example of how far the U.S. has fallen from its founding ideals and how basic human rights and freedoms need to be reasserted again and again. And I'm not usually a fan of using this channel for any sort of political advocacy. I think the best vote that you can make is a vote with your money. In other words, you defund the system by buying Bitcoin. Nevertheless, sometimes there are developments that people on both sides of the aisle, in the U.S. especially, need to be aware of, especially if they care about basic constitutional freedoms. So a summary of this is there are certain powers, as Elizabeth Goitein, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly, says here, there's certain powers a government should not have in a democracy or constitutional republic, I would add. The ability to force ordinary businesses and individuals to serve as surrogate spies is one of them. Even if the targets are supposed to be foreigners, a power this sweeping will be abused. So what we're going to be talking about this morning is something called Section 702. This is a section of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, which basically it was enacted in 2008, as this Google search shows. This Section 702 gives the federal government authority to conduct warrantless surveillance. In other words, they don't have to get a warrant. Warrantless surveillance of suspected foreign terrorists located abroad, which sounds like an okay thing. The problem is, of course, when you give your government these tools, they will be abused by the government to target people on both sides of the aisle. So, for example, the FBI in the U.S. misused these powers to spy on Jan 6 suspects, BLM arrestees, and others on both sides of the aisle. So this really is a bipartisan thing. I want to emphasize this. So this is the basic summary, and I'm going to go through Elizabeth's tweet thread here because I think it's quite good. Buried in the Section 702 reauthorization bill. So this is basically, I guess, FISA gets reauthorized every couple years. And so what has happened, there's a reauthorization bill that's made its way through the House of Representatives, and I believe is now being voted on at the Senate. So buried in Section 702 reauthorization bill passed by the House on Friday, that would be last Friday, is the biggest expansion of domestic surveillance since the Patriot Act. Senator Wyden calls this power terrifying, and he's right. There are people on both sides of the aisle supporting this. I'll explain how this new power works. Under current law, the government can compel quote-unquote electronic communications service providers that have direct access to communications to assist the NSA in conducting Section 702 surveillance. In practice, that means companies like Verizon and Google must turn over the communications of targets of the surveillance. The targets must be foreigners overseas, although the communications can and do include communications with Americans. Now here's the important part. Through a seemingly innocuous change to the definition of quote-unquote electronic communications surveillance provider, and this is often how the government will do it in the fine points of the language that no one has the time or the will to read. Through a seemingly innocuous change to the definition, an amendment offered by House Intel Committee leaders and passed by the House, that's the House of Representatives in the U.S., vastly expands the universe of entities that can be compelled to assist the NSA. If this bill becomes law, any company or individual that provides any service whatsoever may be forced to assist in NSA surveillance as long as they have access to equipment on which communications are transmitted or stored, such as routers, servers, cell towers, etc. That sweeps in an enormous range of U.S. businesses that provide Wi-Fi to their customers and therefore have access to equipment on which communications transit. Barbershops, laundromats, fitness centers, hardware stores, dentists, offices, the list goes on and on. It also includes commercial landlords that rent out the office space where tens of millions of Americans go to work every day, offices of journalists, lawyers, nonprofits, financial advisors, healthcare providers, and more. When the amendment was first unveiled, one of the FISA court amici took the highly unusual step of sounding a public alarm. Civil liberties advocates noted that the provision would encompass hotels, libraries, and coffee shops. The version HPSCI leaders offered Friday therefore exempts those same groups, hotels, library shops, and coffee shops, plus a handful of other establishments. But as the FISA court amicus properly pointed out, the vast majority of U.S. businesses remain fair game. The amendment even extends to service providers who come into our homes. This is the unbelievable part. House cleaners, plumbers, people performing repairs, and IT services service providers have access to laptops and routers inside our homes and could be forced to serve as surrogate spies. None of these people or businesses would be allowed to tell anyone about the assistance they were compelled to provide, so they'd be spying on you and you might not find out about it for years later. This completely bypasses, obviously, constitutional protections against unreasonable search and seizures. They would be under a gag order and they would face heavy penalties if they failed to comply with it. That's not even the worst part. Unlike Google and Verizon, most of these businesses and individuals lack the ability to isolate and turn over a target's communications, so they would be required to give the NSA access to the equipment itself, your computer, your home router, etc., or to use techniques or devices presumably provided by the NSA to copy and turn over entire communication streams and or repositories of stored communications, which would inevitably include vast quantities of wholly domestic communications. In other words, taking place just in your house. The NSA having wholesale access to domestic communications on an unprecedented scale would then be on the quote-unquote honor system to pull out and retain only the communications of approved foreign targets. Let that sink in. Leaders deny that the administration has any intent to use this provision so broadly. Supposedly there's a single type of service provider that the government wants to rope in, but they didn't want anyone to know what that service provider was, so they hid the real goal by writing the amendment as broadly and vaguely as possible. This is always how it's done. But no worries, Americans. The administration isn't actually going to use all the power it just persuaded the House to give it. I cannot overstate how mind-blowingly irresponsible that is. I don't think any administration should be trusted with an Orwellian power like this one. But even if this administration doesn't plan to make full use of it, go ahead and fill in the blank. There are certain powers a government should not have in a democracy. As this is what we just read. The ability to force ordinary businesses and individuals to serve as surrogate spies is one of them. Even if the targets are supposed to be foreigners, a power this sweeping will be abused. I think that's a good summary of it. Again, this isn't directly a Bitcoin issue, but giving the government more access to inside of your house is obviously a terrible, terrible idea. And yet another reason you don't want to store your private keys online in any form. But we also don't want something like this to pass. So if you agree with this, this is the number to call. If you call this number, you will be connected to both of your senators' offices if you're in the U.S., and then you can speak to them and tell them, do not pass everyone is a spy surveillance bill. I'm putting out this video a bit earlier than normal in the hopes to get this out and get people calling their senators if they haven't already. The House may begin. Maybe the Senate is already voting on this as we speak. I haven't had a chance to really dig into that. Please do call this number if there's still time when you see this video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.